They never buried their dead, and some say they never died at all. This isn't folklore. This is one of the most disturbing real horror stories in recorded history, buried beneath centuries of silence. Unearthed only by those willing to face what lies beyond the veil. Welcome to the Ghastly Journal, where we uncover the forgotten, the forbidden, and the families that refuse to die. Today's episode dives deep into the chilling legacy of a cursed bloodline, a family that defied natural law, preserved their dead as if they were still alive, and may have unlocked something far darker than immortality. If you're drawn to true creepy mysteries, haunted family legends, and disturbing historical horror, don't look away, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a warning, and some say they're still out there. The Halwyn family first appeared in the records of a small, windswept parish in the Scottish Highlands around the winter of 1798, though some claim they'd been there long before, watching from the windows of Ravencrest Manor, unmoving, unseen. Locals whispered about their arrival, a stone carriage drawn by black horses, a woman with a lace veil who never spoke, and 3 children who never smiled. At the centre of it all was Malcolm Halwyn, a reclusive physician with a haunted past, expelled from Edinburgh for experiments considered beyond moral reasoning. The townsfolk of Blackmoor called them strange, godless, maybe even cursed. But no one expected what came next. Because when Elenya Halwyn, Malcolm's wife, fell ill and died that December, what the family chose to do with her body would become one of the most disturbing preserved body cases in historical horror, and the beginning of a legacy soaked in silence, science, and something not entirely human. But to understand what really happened inside Ravencrest, we have to go back to the first time someone outside the family stepped through their door. If a family never buries their dead, are they still among the living, or something else entirely? This is the question that haunts the legend of the Halwyns, a name buried in faded parish records, whispered in forgotten corners of Scottish folklore, and resurfacing now, centuries later, in forums, journals, and unsolved mystery archives. It's a story so deeply unsettling, so drenched in historical horror, that some researchers refused to continue once they began. But for those drawn to the darkest real-life mysteries, cursed family stories, and disturbing preservation rituals, this is the one case that refuses to stay dead. The Halwyns weren't witches. They weren't murderers. They weren't even criminals, at least not by the laws of their time. But what they believed, and what they practiced behind the stone walls of Ravencrest Manor, would make them one of the most feared and avoided families in 18th century Scotland. They did not mourn death. They prepared for it, welcomed it, preserved it. And perhaps, in doing so, they kept something alive that should never have survived. Before the whispers of Ravencrest spread, before the journals were hidden, and before the authorities came knocking, it all began with a single tragedy. They arrived with no warning, no announcement, no explanation, only silence. And something that felt wrong the moment they stepped onto the hill. The Halwyn family appeared in Blackmoor during the last frost of 1798, tucked away in a black lacquered carriage pulled by 2 emaciated horses. Witnesses recall the wheels didn't creak, the doors didn't open with sound, and when they passed through the village, even the dogs went quiet. Malcolm Halwyn, tall, angular, with a surgeon's hands and a preacher's stare, bought the long-abandoned Ravencrest manor for cash gold coins no one could trace, stamped with a crest no one recognised. With him came Elenia, pale as bone china, and their 3 children, Edric, solemn and stiff, Morwenna, eyes too wide for her face, and little Thane, who clutched a doll that no one else ever saw move, but many swore they heard whisper. The family kept to themselves. No church, no school, no visitors, no sound. Only smoke from the chimneys and the flicker of candlelight behind warped glass windows. But it wasn't until the townsfolk realised no one had ever seen them leave the manor, not even once, that the unease turned to fear. And then, one cold December morning, that fear took form. Some houses aren't built to be homes. They're built to hold something in. Ravencrest Manor wasn't just a house on a hill. No. It was a fortress of secrets, a mausoleum disguised as a family estate, its black stone exterior absorbing the light and never giving it back. Locals said it stood like a wound in the landscape, an architectural scar that refused to heal. Built in the late 1600s and abandoned for decades, it was the kind of place children dared each other to approach, but never got closer than the outer gate. When the Holwynds moved in, the land seemed to change. The birds that once nested near the chapel trees vanished. The fog lingered longer. Tools rusted faster. Even the air around the manor felt heavier, like it remembered pain. Those brave enough to pass by at dusk swore they saw shadows move in the upper windows, even when no candle burned. And always, always, there was the faint scent of clove and rot, like something had been treated, but not entirely preserved. By the time the first snow fell, the people of Blackmoor had already stopped calling it a home. They called it what it truly was, Ravencrest, the place that keeps the dead and never lets them go. The first time someone stepped inside Ravencrest, they didn't come out the same. It was Dr. Godfrey Vale, the village physician, summoned on a freezing December morning by a pale, silent boy at his doorstep, young Thane Holwyn. Eyes blank, voice barely a whisper, mothers not breathing. What the doctor found inside that manor would ignite one of the most chilling true historical horror stories ever documented. The parlour was too quiet, the windows too dim, and the woman lying in the upstairs bedroom was far past saving. But it wasn't death that disturbed him. It was what came next. Because when Dr. Vale offered to arrange burial, Malcolm Holwyn simply shook his head and replied with something no physician ever expects to hear. She stays. What began as grief soon revealed itself as something deeper, something designed. And what the doctor saw on his way out, just a glimpse, would haunt him until the day he died. But he wasn't the only one who tried to intervene. And the next to cross the threshold was a man of God. The first outsider to witness what the Holwynds called mourning left questioning everything he believed about death. Dr. Godfrey Vale was no stranger to loss. He'd delivered babies and pronounced countless deaths across the Highlands. But when little Thane appeared at his door that icy morning, barefoot in the snow, his lips tinged blue, and simply said, "She won't open her eyes," something in the doctor's gut twisted. He followed the child up the winding hill to Ravencrest, where the door opened before he could knock, as if the house had been expecting him. Inside, the air was stale and warm, filled with the scent of herbs. clove, and something else. Something sweet and wrong. Elenya Hulwyn lay on the bed, pale and motionless. Her hands folded over her chest like a portrait. Rigor mortis had already set in. But what disturbed Dr. Vale most wasn't her body. It was Malcolm Hulwyn standing beside her, whispering instructions in Latin. Not prayers, but procedures. When Vale recommended immediate burial, Malcolm's response was calm. Precise. She must be kept intact. He gestured to copper instruments, linen soaked in oils. A cellar chilled to exactly 38 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's when the doctor realized they weren't preparing for a funeral. They were preparing for preservation. The moment Reverend Malachi Crowe entered Ravencrest, he claimed the house swallowed sound and maybe something else, too. Called upon by Dr. Vale days after Elenya's death, the Reverend expected a standard blessing, perhaps a reluctant burial rite. What he found instead was a scene so deeply unsettling it would later be described in his journal as a violation not of scripture, but of creation itself. The parlour was lit with 12 candles positioned at precise intervals, and the family was seated around the dining table with Elenya's body at the head, dressed in her Sunday best, her eyes stitched shut, her posture artificially upright. Her skin had the waxy gleam of something both lifelike and entirely devoid of life. None of the children spoke. Malcolm simply gestured for the Reverend to begin his prayer. But Reverend Crowe couldn't bring himself to look away from the corpse because her head would tilt ever so slightly when he looked down. He later claimed the corpse was reacting to the scripture, flinching subtly at phrases about resurrection and final judgment. The Reverend left without completing the rite, stating, "What I saw at that table was not mourning. It was rehearsal, and still." The Hulwyns remained untouched by law, until someone made it official. The first official report filed against the Hulwyns didn't come from a doctor or a priest. It came from the local sheriff, and it never made it past his desk. Sheriff Alden Rook had served Blackmore for over 2 decades, and believed in facts, not folklore. But even he couldn't ignore the unease growing among the townspeople. Reports of children hearing whispers near Ravencrest's property line. Claims of dim candlelight seen flickering in the forest behind the manor when no one should have been there. And most disturbing, the scent of embalming fluid drifting into the village long after Elenya Hulwyn was presumed buried. Rook decided to confront Malcolm Hulwyn directly. But when he entered the manor, he wasn't met with resistance, in fact. Malcolm welcomed him in with a strange, hollow warmth. "Would you like to see her?" he asked, before leading the sheriff not upstairs, but below. The basement was cold, precisely chilled. Inside a stone chamber, Elenya lay in a glass case perfectly preserved, no decay. Her cheeks faintly coloured as if still flushed from sleep. Malcolm spoke clinically, showing records of temperature, chemicals, and body measurements. "We're not defying death," he said. "We're studying it." Sheriff Rook left without filing the report. Not out of fear, out of confusion. Because part of him, a small, terrible part, believed her eyes had moved. 1 death might be grief. 2 begins to look like design. Just 6 months after Elenya's body was preserved beneath Ravencrest, Malcolm's eldest son, Edric Hulwyn, was found lifeless in the garden, his face serene, his limbs carefully folded, like he had been placed, not fallen, but once again, There was no burial, no mourning, no grave. Instead, Edric joined his mother in the cellar. What had started as a tragedy was quietly becoming a pattern, and whispers began to shift from pity to fear. The townspeople avoided the hill entirely. Children dared each other to touch the outer gate. The family no longer shopped at the village. Supplies were delivered, and the scent, thick, chemical, clove-like, grew stronger. But the most terrifying realization was still to come. The Hullwinds weren't hiding what they did. They were perfecting it. And when a stranger arrived asking to be taught, the legacy took its next, irreversible step. By the time the second body was placed in the cellar, it was no longer a house of grief. It was a shrine to defiance. Edric Hullwind's sudden death was never explained. No illness, no injury, no witnesses. Malcolm claimed it was a fainting spell. But those who saw the boy days earlier recalled his skin had taken on a strange pallor. His eyes unfocused, like something inside him had already begun to fade. When villagers offered condolences, Malcolm declined. There would be no funeral. Instead, carpenters were paid in gold to build what he called a containment vessel, a second glass chamber, identical to Elena's. When they asked who it was for, Malcolm replied with terrifying calm, "It is for the continuation of our work." From that moment on, the Hullwinds ceased interaction with the outside world entirely. Deliveries were left at the base of the hill and collected only at night. Their manor windows were blacked out. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. Some said they saw the children wandering the edge of the forest, barefoot, silent, unblinking. Others claimed to hear humming from underground. But no one was brave enough to climb the hill anymore. Because now it wasn't just a house of the dead, it was a place preparing for more. You don't knock on Ravencrest's door. You're summoned. That's what Emily Stroud was told before her first visit. A travelling student of anatomical science from Glasgow. She arrived in Blackmoor under the pretense of studying advanced embalming. But rumours swirled that she had been invited by Malcolm Hullwyn himself. And when she returned from the manor 3 days later, her colleagues said she wasn't the same. Pale, unblinking, speaking slowly, deliberately, as if measuring every syllable. She claimed the Hullwinds had unlocked a method of cellular suspension, a preservation technique so advanced it blurred the line between biology and ritual. But when pressed for details, she shut down completely, murmuring only, "It's not about stopping death, it's about separating it." Her notes were full of chilling details. Body temperature maintained at exactly 38.3 degrees fascist, modified blood substitute laced with mercury, and hymns whispered during incisions. One page was stained red. Another simply read, "She blinked." The university dismissed her findings as delusion. But the people of Blackmoor know better. They said she'd gone too close to the truth. And the truth was starting to seep out through the walls, through the woods, and through the eyes of those who should not see. When the third death came, no one asked what happened. They only asked who would be next. Morwenna Hullwyn, the middle child, was found lying perfectly still beneath the conservatory window. Her eyes closed, arms crossed, lips sewn shut with golden thread. Malcolm made no public announcement. The villagers only knew because the same coffin maker was called, again told to construct yet another glass chamber, identical in size, chilled from beneath. That night, Screams were heard echoing from the hill, not of pain, but of ritual, sharp, rhythmic, and hollow. A fog rolled down from Ravencrest and lingered in the village for days, carrying the now familiar scent of cloves, blood, and something chemical. 3 preserved bodies, 2 children left, and still no authority dared intervene. The Reverend had left town. The doctor refused to speak of it, and Sheriff Rook, once brave, had become a ghost himself, drinking, muttering about eyes that still moved. But the danger wasn't just inside the manor anymore. Animals were found gutted in precise patterns, parish graves disturbed, and those who looked too long at Ravencrest swore they began to dream of a room filled with bodies, watching them back. By the time the fire reached Ravencrest, no one believed it was an accident because some houses burn and others resist. In the spring of 1801, the manor erupted in flames visible for miles. But when villagers climbed the hill expecting ash and ruin, they found the stone walls blackened yet standing, and the family missing. No bodies, no remains, just the glass chambers, shattered, and something was gone. What came next wasn't just local panic, it was documented phenomena, stretching far beyond Blackmoor. Because the Halwyn legacy didn't die in the fire, it migrated. What they found beneath the floorboards wasn't human anymore. It was something meticulously designed to look like grief. When villagers entered the burned remains of Ravencrest, they expected to find charred bodies, or at least bones. Instead, they found the chambers intact and open. But beneath the floorboards of the cellar, investigators uncovered something far worse, a narrow tunnel system, lined with wax-sealed jars, each containing fragments of preserved flesh, teeth, strands of hair labelled by name and date, even from those never reported dead. There were 5 full-length operating tables, stained and grooved. One was smaller, clearly built for a child. And in the far chamber, blueprints, hand-drawn schematics of the human nervous system overlaid with geometric patterns that matched no known science. At the centre was a phrase etched in Latin, "What is kept whole cannot be judged." Malcolm hadn't been preserving his family. He had been practicing on them. The fire hadn't claimed them. It had set them free, and some part of them was still missing. The most disturbing detail wasn't what was found, it was what was missing. In the final police inventory of Ravencrest ruins, a single item was listed under unaccounted for specimen number 5, Thane Halwyn. The youngest child, no body, no chamber, no trace. But weeks after the fire, sightings began. First in neighbouring villages, a barefoot boy with blackened eyes, standing in fields at dawn, unmoving, then vanishing without sound. Then across the highlands, stories spread of strange symbols carved into church doors and barn walls. Always in sets of 5, travellers reported waking with nosebleeds, vivid dreams of embalming tables, and whispers in a voice they didn't recognise yet felt intimately familiar. A midwife in Perth claimed she delivered a stillborn with lungs already filled with embalming fluid. The local clergy tried to declare mass hysteria, but one archivist wrote, "This isn't folklore, it's inheritance." Thane wasn't buried, he was transformed, and what he became wasn't a ghost or legend. It was a template, a blueprint, a seed. The human body was never meant to be paused, only ended. But Malcolm Halwyn had tried to rewrite that rule, and something answered. Months after Ravencrest's fire, university libraries across Scotland began receiving identical envelopes, each containing anatomical sketches in Halwyn's handwriting, soaked faintly in embalming oil. Some were crude diagrams of circulatory control. Others displayed full-body overlays that combined organic nervous systems with copper filaments and mirrored glass plates, as if attempting to turn memory into machinery. One archivist, who opened a sealed package too quickly, suffered a seizure after merely touching the diagram. His final words were, "They're still thinking." Worse, one journal included a list of towns, dates, and predicted times of death, some accurate to the minute. Medical examiners tried to dismiss the claims, until one autopsy revealed that a rural farmhand had metallic thread fused into his spinal cord, with no sign of surgery. A silent evolution was unfolding not in labs, but in secret, in cellars, in hands guided by Halwyn's legacy. It wasn't resurrection, it was replication, and it was no longer confined to Blackmore. If grief creates ghosts, then what does obsession create? In 1803, a London apothecary anonymously received a locked crate marked only with a wax-sealed emblem, a 5-pointed knot wrapped in copper wire. Inside were 5 preserved human hands, each surgically removed, each grasping a quill. Alongside them was a single parchment, filled front to back with journal entries, attributed to Elenya Halwyn, written in perfect cursive, dated 2 years after her death. Forensic scholars dismissed it as forgery until one phrase kept repeating across entries in Latin and Old Scots. "She dreams through the wire." Reports of sleepwalkers grew in frequency. People found standing in alleyways for hours, whispering to themselves, hands moving as if sewing invisible threads. When asked what they were doing, several responded with the same chilling answer: preparing the vessel. Asylums filled, scholars vanished, and all the while, those same 5-pointed copper symbols began appearing beneath floorboards in newly built hospitals across Edinburgh, Glasgow, and York. It wasn't a haunting, it was a transmission. A code embedded not in books, but in the bodies of those willing to obey. They weren't trying to stop death, they were trying to reassign it. In a sealed confession uncovered decades later in the archives of the Royal College of Surgeons, a former assistant to Dr. Godfrey Vail described something even darker than preservation, a process called transference. The assistant claimed that Malcolm Halwyn believed the soul wasn't destroyed at death, only displaced, through a specific combination of chemical embalming, electromagnetic field exposure, and ritual incantation rooted in forgotten Highland funerary rites. He believed consciousness could be redirected into another host. One passage read, "The boy died at midnight. The man awoke by dawn, confused, older, weeping in a voice not his own." Autopsy logs soon revealed anomalies, patients with double-layered retinal tissue, mismatched dental records, and even 2 separate DNA signatures within the same spinal column. These weren't resurrections, they were installations, and each experiment brought them closer to perfection. By the time authorities tried to intervene, Ravencrest's blueprints had already been duplicated across 5 estates, each funded by anonymous patrons, each rumoured to house a living archive. The Halwyns never wanted to defeat death. They wanted to possess it. Some families leave behind heirlooms. The Halwyns left instructions. Over a century after Ravencrest vanished into smoke, fragments of their design still resurface in hospitals, research labs, even forgotten farmhouses wired with copper beneath the walls. But the most terrifying part isn't that their legacy endured. It's that it adapted. Because what was once obsession is now protocol. You don't need to believe in the Hull winds for their work to touch you. In 1987, a cardiac surgeon in Maryland reported a bizarre case: a patient's blood coagulated in unnatural patterns seconds before death, forming fine lines across the skin that resembled the 5-knot sigil from Ravencrest Spacements. The man had no known connection to the Highlands. But weeks later, a medical journal traced the formulation of his anaesthetic to a supplier in Glasgow, operating under a shell company named Halwyn Instruments. Lintortover. That lab has since disappeared. Yet the patient's tissue sample is still studied today. Why? Because it resists decay. Even now, something survived the fire. Something built to spread, not be seen. And now, it's embedded in systems too vast to trace. They didn't just build machines to hold the dead. They built machines to carry the living inside them. In 2009, a neurologist reviewing post-mortem brain scans from trauma victims discovered a pattern: tiny micro-scarring in the hippocampus. Symmetrical, uniform, as if etched. It was dismissed as a digital artifact until one technician, cross-referencing data from unrelated regions, found the same formation in a teenager, in an infant, in a body dead for 40 years. The pattern matched a hand-drawn diagram from the Holwyn archives' Phase 5 cognitive anchoring. The implication they had succeeded not in resurrection, but in transfer. The human mind carried forward through memory implants and chemical embalming. And none of us know how many have already been overwritten. Sometimes, memory isn't passed through blood. Sometimes, it's implanted. In a 2021 sleep study in Oregon, 3 participants, all unrelated, reported the exact same recurring dream: a cold chamber, a woman behind glass, humming in a language they didn't speak. Their brain scans lit up identically. One subject, when asked to draw what she saw, sketched the Ravencrest floor plan accurate to scale. When confronted, she wept. She didn't know what it meant, but she said one sentence that was later quoted in over 50 research papers. She said, "I was next." What had once been a family curse was now a global haunting passed not through DNA, but through something deeper: impression, frequency, ritual. The fire never killed Thane Halwyn. It released him. No death record, no grave, only sightings, from Brazil to Mongolia, from abandoned subway tunnels to rural emergency rooms. Descriptions of a barefoot boy with black eyes and embalmed skin appear in incident reports, always during electrical malfunctions or mass sleepwalking events. He doesn't speak. He doesn't age. But those who encounter him develop unusual symptoms: nosebleeds, insomnia, vivid dreams of surgical tables and wires beneath their skin. One girl drew him perfectly after claiming he was humming inside my mirror. And every year, on the fire's anniversary, the same copper symbol appears burned into glass, etched into steel, whispered across shortwave radios. The boy wasn't the end. He was the carrier. If you found this recording, you're already part of it. The final journal entry attributed to Malcolm Holwyn wasn't discovered in Blackmore, but in a time locked safe, hidden beneath the Paris catacombs. It wasn't a confession. It was a blueprint detailing how to awaken the preserved, once society forgets how to fear death. The last line simply reads, "Memory is the true embalming fluid." As we digitize consciousness, preserve faces in AI, and upload emotion into synthetic shells, we edge closer to what the Halwinds worshipped, not eternal life, but eternal containment. So if you start dreaming of glass rooms, if you hear humming through walls, if mirrors blink, don't run. It's already watching, and it remembers you. We chase immortality through science, memory, and machines. But what if the Halwinds weren't warning us? They were showing us where it ends in trying to outsmart death. They may have created something far worse, a legacy that rewrites identity, hijacks grief, and embeds itself in our dreams. And if their story teaches us anything, it's that the past doesn't stay buried, it evolves. So ask yourself, have you been dreaming of a room behind glass? Have you heard humming that no one else notices? Because if so, you might already be part of the next chapter. If this story disturbed you or made you question what we inherit, drop a comment below. Your thoughts might mirror someone else's nightmare. Don't let this be the video you forget tomorrow. Save it. Share it. And if you want more unsettling truths from history's darkest corners, make sure you hit subscribe. We're only just getting started.